And there we go. Okay, so welcome everybody to Active Travel Cafe. We're going to start with our usual crowdsourced news update in just a minute, find out what's happening all over the UK in terms of active travel, and then we'll leap into our keynote this evening, which is Kit Allwinter from Active Travel England, who's got some toolkits and tools and other shenanigans to share with us this evening. So it's very exciting. So we've got Kit in a moment, but first of all, do remember, I'll remind you again, any questions for Kit when he's presenting, please pop them into the Q&A feature. And Kit, thank you in advance for joining us. Okay, so could we start, please, by people telling us what's happening in terms of active travel around this lovely set of islands of ours? Who wants to go first in terms of a news update? Okay, Catherine, tell us what's happening.
So we've just had news in Dundee that the Cycling Scotland conference is going to be happening in September. So that's really exciting for us. I think the council have done quite a lot of work to make that happen, which is a nice sign of a bit of a commitment from them that they want to be seen as a cycling city, and a nice sign from Cycling Scotland that they think it's worth coming here as well and bringing all the various great and good of active travel to Dundee. So that's my exciting news.
Oh, Catherine, that's brilliant. So that's in September.
September the 10th, yeah.
September the 10th, mark it in your diaries, everybody. Maybe you could come and give us an update after it.
Yeah, we'll do.
Amazing. Brilliant. Oh, thanks, Catherine. Lovely bit of update there. Tom Cohen.
Thanks. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Briefly, I'm at the University of Westminster at the Active Travel Academy. For those who've not come across me, we launched, together with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Cycling and Walking last week, its report on active travel and social justice, which you can find on the internet. Hopefully useful things in there for all concerned.
Brilliant. Tom, is just if we search for it, Tom, presumably we'll find it online.
Well, I would love to be able to say with confidence that that is the case.
Excellent.
Maybe I will find some way of conveying a link to you in case.
I was going to say
someone will post a link within the next 30 seconds. I guarantee it.
Excellent. There we go. I was just holding out because I thought that needs a link in the chat. Okay. Any other updates from any of you in your local areas? Yep. Kurt?
Just while we're talking about events, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Active City York is happening in July this year in York. And obviously we'd be more than happy to see all of you there. It's the 2nd and 3rd, and hopefully we'll see you there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kit. What's the date of that again? Just we've all got it.
2nd and 3rd of July.
Excellent. Keep it good. Right. Any more before we kick off? Tim?
Even sooner, it's the Worcester World Bike Summit next Thursday and Friday. Somebody on the group will tell me what's right about it. It's the school buses riding as a school bus to school, and they've got people coming from all over the world, I believe. And just as we're talking about links, Steve, I'm now a bikeability person, and marshalling some children through a nice off-road bit of track. We passed the back end of a brand new housing estate with 30 meters of black tarmac coming off the last cul-de-sac, linking up with the off-road track. And I keep seeing this in Leicester, that they're a really nice little, you can get to the city centre along the riverbank this way rather than down the road. So really nice little bit of, I don't know how they're doing it, but they're doing it.
Oh, nice one, Tim. That's lovely. Bit of uplifting news from Leicester. Brilliant. Okay. I think we're just about there. I think somebody got there. Catherine, I think you've still got your mic on. There we go. Okay. Right, good. We're all muted. I would say, so if there's no more breaking news, Kit, I think we're ready to come to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Steve. First of all, just before I get going, it's really exciting. I was just saying this to Steve and Ruth before we got going, and Sally, that it's really nice to be back here and presenting this time, because I've been using Active Travel Cafe to inform my professional development / personal interest for many years now, since the days it was an in-person meeting in a pub in Manchester. So it's really nice to come back and be here to engage with you. Unfortunately, I can't usually make it at 5 p.m. On a Tuesday. I have to watch it on catch up. So it's nice to actually be here and to tell you all about ATE's Toolkit. Normally I will say that I give a series of training slides on this over the course of a day. I've been informed by Steve that you won't sign up for 8 hours because apparently midnight is too late to finish. So instead, what I'm going to try and do is batter through it in about 30 minutes. And that means we're going to focus on certain tools more than other tools. We're going to very much be gliding over the surface of the toolkit that Active Travel England uses. But hopefully what we can do is just kind of explain a little bit of our thinking behind it, talk to you about how we've got to where we've got to. And then in the Q&A later, I'm sure that, we'll discuss where we're going next and what our forward vision is for it. However, what I do have is a series of slides, about 30 slides. And if those of you who know me trying to do 30 slides in 35 minutes is going to be exciting, then we can get through them. But one of them is just this cover slide. So that's less than a minute. So we're already ahead. So ATE's tools, they were published about a year ago now. Good Lord, how that happened. And they're published for a reason. They are there so that consultants, practitioners, campaigners, everyone knows how Active Travel England is actually assessing the stuff that we look at and the stuff that we receive. Really crucially, it's there as a repository of best practice and to enable that, but also to really understand that, if we present the rubric and the marking rubric to people, then they then say, hang on, you've marked our scheme really badly. The answer is that, well, you knew exactly how we were going to mark this beforehand, whilst we might quibble over 1 or 2 points. If you say it scored 12 and we say it scored 55, there's a difference there. So anyway, we've done some detailed training to authorities, not all by me. My colleagues who are far better at it than I am have done a lot of the combined authorities, and I've gone around the country in a series of roadshows recently doing local authority training. So hopefully by now, everyone, at least one person in your area has been trained up in how to use our tools. And I do request that if you want to, do seek them out and try and talk to them about it. There are 4 tools that we're going to very briefly touch on tonight, and I mean briefly. There is the route cross-section tool, which is looking at whether or not you can fit something down a street in a very simple way. It looks at the potential building-to-building width and then says, well, if you want 2 meters of footway, 2 meters of cycleway, 6 meters of carriageway, 2 meters of carriageway, and 2 meters of footway, you need X amount of space. Oh, you don't have enough. What's going to give? But it does do it in a way that enables us and is tied to, oh, I got too excited there, that is tied to LTN 120. And so it will say, oh, hang on, if it's 40 mile an hour road, you need this amount of buffer. If it's this, you need that. So it's a useful way at a very early stage of just going, what can I possibly fit down this corridor? There's then the crossing selector tool, which again is a design assistance tool. We're calling it this sort of very early stage stuff, where we go, look, if you want to get people from side road A to side road B on the other side of this main road, how can we possibly do that? It builds on a lot of work that was done by previous people, at TFGM, at London, TfL, and really just looks at how you can get people across that main road. We want to grow it into looking at all sorts of crossings, be it a refuge island in the mid-link, be it a roundabout, whatever else. But at the moment, it currently does just that very little bit. We then have what we term the scheme review tools. And the scheme review tools are the ones that we are really using to assess quality on stuff. So the other 2 will help you in designing a scheme, enabling you to understand whether or not something is possible. What scheme review tool does is it not only helps you in that regard, but it also is how we assess the quality of it. It will give you a number out of 100 at the end of it that says, that's how good we think that scheme is. And we'll come back to what that number means later in this sort of session. but hopefully, out of 100 is a relatively simple system for us to work with. I don't think it needs too much explanation. There are two tools that fit in that category. One of them is the area check, on which I am not going to talk tonight because we simply don't have time, and because low traffic neighborhoods and things like that tend to be slightly easier to understand. What we're going to instead focus on is the route check, which is why it's in gold, a nice little gold box there for us. So what we're going to do is talk about that. How did the route check come to be? Well, it's been a long and storied history, starting in about 1996. If you cast your minds back to John Major's government, which I know is a long time ago. I don't know how many prime ministers ago that was now. Far too many, I think. But we had the National Cycling Strategy. That resulted in things like the cycle audit and cycle review tools. Fast forward a little bit, we had the London Cycling Design Standards. We've had gear change in 2020, and obviously then LTN 120. So it's built on a lot of these things. The idea being that you start to develop some level of service tools for pedestrians and for cycling. And what we've tried to do in the ATE route check tool was put them together. We have a long-term plan to actually add other modes to that as well. So things like buses and otherwise, so that, if you were looking at a street in a holistic point of view, you could understand how a street is delivering for all the different users. But in the meantime, we're Active Travel England. Sorry, Chris. We're Active Travel England. We're looking at walking, wheeling, and cycling. So we're mainly focusing on pedestrians and cyclists at this time. Pedestrians, of course, including those with other modes. So how is the route check structured? It's an Excel spreadsheet. We know that's not ideal. We have begun a prioritisation process. But in terms of the easiest way of getting it out to every local authority, every campaign group, every interested party, every consultant in the country, Excel was deemed to be the way to do it. So we have got a large series of tabs in this spreadsheet, and they're very simply colored. If it's green, you've got to do something on that tab. If it's, I think what we're officially calling ATE aubergine, it is something that is coming out of the tool. So what you do is you can see you work through the various bits of the tool, and you'll get results out in the purple bit. Most of the bits of the tool, most of the tabs you do regardless of the style of route. If it's an off-traffic path, you go down one path. If it's a on-street, on-carriageway path, you go down another one. Again, one of the downsides of Excel is that Excel means that we need it to cater for all eventualities. So therefore, there's a lot of complexity in this. There's a lot of cells in it. One of the things we're looking at doing, if we digitize it, if we make it more accessible, is also kind of going, well, do you know what? Some of the criteria, some of the metrics, and we'll come on to this, look at if it's a busy street, X, if it's a quiet street, Y, if it's a traffic-free path, Z, then you can turn around and go, well, actually, do you know what? You can set that at the beginning on a digitized tool, and then you will have a much simpler way of getting there. So here we go. What I'm going to do now is talk you very, very briefly through the 4 component parts of the route check. Again, I don't want to go over time. If we have more time at the end after questions, I can, of course, open up a route check and we can have a look at it in more detail. But wary that there might be some questions. I'm really keen to kind of batter through it, and then I'd rather we all finished early than that I overran. Because that is my want to normally do the latter. So let's talk about policy conflicts. So policy conflicts sit at the very, very front of the route check, and they are, in a way, the most important things in it. What they do, regardless of whether a route is on a path or on a carriageway, is they enable us to understand whether or not most people will be able to use that route. So they really relate to actual best practice, as it says here on this slide, but really it's about accessibility, and they are very much about walking and wheeling as much as they are about cycling. So what we do when we look at a scheme is we look at the 6 policy conflicts. We will just go through them in a minute. and we say, do they exist in the current street layout? Will they exist in the designed proposed street layout? And what we want to do is ideally see a reduction in them. In the event that a policy conflict is present in the design, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not something we want to fund. It's not necessarily a bad scheme. It's just that if you look at best practice, it says you shouldn't do this thing, and therefore we want to understand why you've chosen to do it. And you'll understand what I mean by that a little bit when we come on to the 6 conflicts in general. But the key part there is at the very, very bottom of that slide where it says, in summary, you are selecting the user base of the route, because every time you have a policy conflict, every time you have something that is against best practice, what you tend to end up doing is restricting the number of people or the type of people who can use your scheme. So the first one is, are cyclists separated from pedestrians? Now, again, this is a classic example of something that might not be against, might not be inappropriate. It could be the right choice. If you've got a rural path between village A and village B, and it's only got X number of users, a shared use path might well be the right one. However, LTN 120 and Gear Change does tell us that, generally speaking, separating pedestrians and cyclists is best practice, particularly in urban areas and so on. So really what we're looking at here is, have you done that? Have you engaged with that principle? Have you chosen the most appropriate choice there? Now, there could be a load of reasons why you've done it. What we're really looking at here is, if you've got a urban dual carriageway that's 30 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour, you've got 6 lanes of motor traffic, and you've managed to say, oh, well, actually, we've got a 2-meter shared use path next to it. It's a key part of our LC whip. It's really, really important. We're saying, is it though? Because have you really allocated that space adequately compared to, like we said, village A, village B, a 2-meter shared use path, a 3-meter shared use path might be the right choice. Principle 2 contains my favorite photograph of any active travel scheme in the country on the right. It's now all gone. You'll be very glad to hear. I'm sure many of you have seen it before. But, is the route free from barriers? Or cyclist dismount signs, because we know that not everyone can get out of a bike and hike it over a barrier. That is, of course, very ableist thinking. Not to mention, frankly, with e-bikes getting more and more difficult for anyone to achieve. So really, we're asking, why have you put that in there? What are you trying to achieve? Have you tried everything? Principle 3 is it logical? Is it easy to understand? If you've got to put up signage that explains how to get through a junction as a cyclist or as a pedestrian, then probably you're doing it a little bit wrong. It needs to be intuitive. That's one of the principles in LTN 120. So we are really, just asking, how easy is it to do? And when we go out and site and inspect things, really what we're looking for is the fact that you're walking along a route or you're cycling along a route, you don't feel abandoned at a certain point. You always understand what the next route is to do, and that it doesn't require excess thought to do it, because at the end of the day, we want 8-year-olds to be able to cycle, 8-year-olds to be able to cycle. We don't want us to do a maths problem or a weird logic puzzle to understand how to get over a junction. We've got policy principle 4, which is, are services suitable for all users? Again, there may be stipulated situations where a bound or sealed service isn't appropriate, although there obviously are fewer than we would expect. Again, it comes down to context, really. Are you designing a route that is a core part of your LC whip, that is linking a school, and therefore it needs to be used in January the 6th at 7 a.m. in the pouring rain? Well, a muddy path isn't going to make a dad or a mum take their kid to primary school. That way, if they can avoid it, they will drive. On the other hand, a sealed path might make it so. Conversely, if it's a rural path to a a point of interest or a viewpoint, then you might have an argument about maybe it doesn't require to be surfaced. Although then, of course, my question would be, well, why are you asking us to fund it in that situation? But really, it's about just thinking around, are the surfaces suitable for the users that you want to use the route? And if the answer is you don't want all the users to use that route, that's a question that we need to look at more closely. Similarly, is lighting provided? We ask, is appropriate lighting provided? Because we are very aware that there are a number of things that might impact on this. On the right there, you can see in the zombie apocalypse, I believe it's in Nottingham, I think, the zombie apocalypse, but it's about bat-friendly lighting. They've chosen red there, so that's exciting. On the left there is a scheme nearer me in West Yorkshire. But the question is that lighting actually making it more attractive to use, or are you going to create pools of darkness between those lighting poles down a very narrow path that actually mean you're still not going to use it? So is appropriate lighting provided is the question, because that could be everything from solar studs to bollards to actual street lighting. Crucially, one of the other things we ask, the final one that we ask in the policy check, is does the route fit into something sensible? We've seen a lot of over the years of isolated routes that don't necessarily want to be part of a network, and that's not to say that you can't build the first link of a network. We'd love you to do that, but really it's about just showing to us, to other funding bodies, to everyone involved, that really what you're doing is part of a thought through approach. So if you're linking, you're building a major route down an A road, for example, let's say, behind a hedge, that's great. We'd love to see that. But if there's a school 100 meters down one of the side roads, well, is that school accessible from it? Is it part of the network? Does it link into it? Or is it actually an isolated route that doesn't necessarily link to things? So that's the policy principles. There are 6 of them. They're quite broad, but I hope that I've explained a little bit about one of the things we really look for is just an understanding of why you might have chosen certain decisions when you do that. And I think what those checks do is they don't necessarily rule out schemes, but they really make you consider why you have made certain choices or certain compromises in your design. Does it mean that it's not appropriate? And I think, if we take back that example of a link to a school, then, that's, if you want it to be how kids get to that school, that needs to be usable all year round. It needs to be usable by a whole range of users. If you're hitting any of those policy conflicts on it and telling me that it is part of the main part of your LC whip, if you're saying this is a really core route for us, well, then, but it's got barriers on it, it's not surface and it's not lit. Is that really the case? So, it provides a useful check for making sure that the business cases and the objectives of the scheme are being met. What we're going to move on to now, aware of time, is the 16, you'll be glad to hear I'm not going to go through all of them, critical issues that we look at Active Travel England. So if you think of the policy conflicts as assessing your user base and choosing the widest possible user base to build the best possible business case, then what we're doing is saying that once you've chosen that user base, we want to make sure they're being safe. The 16 critical issues that we have are linked to road layouts in general that are linked to higher levels of killed and serious injuries on the roads for active travel users, be they pedestrians or cyclists. So really what we're trying to do here is saying you're designing in conflict, you're designing in things that are not best practice, we would have issues about them. The 16 are on the screen. I would not worry about copying them down. They're all available in our tool. SA stands for safety critical. Make that work. But you can see here that they're generally set on motor traffic. So conflict at side hooks, we're talking left hooks, right hooks, provision of crossings. Are they frequent enough? We look at the sound of the crossings. Are people crossing multiple lanes that are uncontrolled? Is traffic going too fast? Is there too much motor traffic? Things like that. 12 and 13 do, I guess, apply to a lot of places. They're kind of traditionally seen as being limited to certain cities in the UK because of their link to trams, but you can definitely have level crossings that are at the wrong angle. And indeed, working with Network Rail on certain schemes, you might end up with a situation where you could be too close to a train line. So there's a lot of stuff in there. But what we would say is that we look at all 16 of these in every scheme, and really what we're looking for is to try and make sure there aren't any of them. I'm going to give you an example now, which is this one. We're going to talk about conflict at side roads and priority junctions, which is the first one on the list because it was the first one on the list. So that makes a lot of sense. What I'm going to do is present a slide to you. Normally we would do this in some kind of fun group shout out situation, but because of the nature of Active Travel Cafe, I will instead just talk over it. So as you can see, I've employed the finest possible graphic designers for this particular slide. And I spent a long time on this, so please don't knock it. However, what we have here is a road with a junction, and it's got, I can't even count, 4 side roads on the way to the junction. And what we therefore say is we look at the metric in the route check as the route's going along the street, and we say, well, what does each of these score? Let's put some criteria down here. So here we go. We know that that side road's got this side road's got that. You won't be surprised to hear, given the critical issue is over 2,500 vehicles, that the first ones are therefore critical issues. These are bad. These are bad side roads to try and cross on foot or on a bike, and we would expect something to happen there to try and make the scheme better. But there are levels of good, and for the purpose of demonstration, they are now going to be displayed to you. So less than 2,500 without any treatment, we're still talking, that's not great. We'd love to see a treatment there, but it's not a critical issue. 2,500 is the number to get a critical issue. Therefore, they score a 0. There is some entry treatment here at the amber level. And then obviously, you can see how I had to make this slide work. The final one on the right there is indeed the final score on the right, and it's green. So what you can see, of course, is that even though it's got more than 2,500 vehicles a day crossing it, because there is a parallel crossing, we think it's a good one. And so those are the critical issues, that each of them is like that. They've got a critical threshold, and then they have a score associated with them. Moving on from critical issues, we don't have a critical threshold anymore. What we instead have is that simple 0, 1, 2 metric, and that works for everything. In fact, there are 26 of them. You'll be very, very glad to hear that I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but they are based on accessibility, comfort, directness, attractiveness, and cohesion. And those of you who have been paying attention at the back of class will know, of course, that those are from LTN 120, in which case, well done you, and cheeky quality street for you, well done. What we're doing, I guess, then, is that if you think about the policy check as being how big is that user base, if you think about the critical issues check about being how safe is that user base, then what this check is doing is how transformational is the scheme going to be? How many more people are going to use it if you score highly on this? So obviously more points means more people, and I'm going to assume at some level down the line, if the government is really on board with this, more points means more people, which means more prizes. If you don't mind me just bastardizing a bit of Bruce Forsyth there. So there are 7 in accessibility, 6 in attractiveness, 3 in comfort, 6 in directness, and 4 in cohesion. I do have, that's quite exciting. I do have a list of them somewhere in my notes. So what we can do is, like, accessibility covers gradient, signaling equipment, the presence of barriers, bus stop interactions, wheelchair access, and blue badge access. Comfort is things like surface and width. Cohesion is things like the impact of motor traffic on pedestrians and cyclists. Attractiveness is things like wayfinding, places to rest. And directness is about deviation and delays at junctions. So you can see that we do try and cover a lot of things in this. There's a reason that the route check is quite an intimidating document when you open it, because there are 157, I think, metrics. So, it's not a document to be picked up lightly. But what we do is we look at that, and that's about how many more people are going to use your scheme. So that's very, very good. But one of the things that's really, really important to us at ATE is that we are not just a team about walking and cycling. We are not just here to enable more people to walk and cycle. And so when we look at the scheme, we have to look at it using the traditional manual for streets approach of movement and place. which I'm sure we're all familiar with, but basically, it's usually about 9 boxes, about movement up on one side, place along the bottom. If it's a place that's really high but low movement, then you're going to focus on trees and things like that. If it's a place that's really high on movement but low on place, then really you just want to get people through it as fast as possible. What we therefore do is we do look at the placemaking impacts of all the decisions we made, because we know that on top of the fact that just making places nicer to be is really, really important, we also know that if places are nicer, then more people will walk to them, they'll linger in them for longer, people will cycle to them and stay for longer. So actually, in a way, simply making a place nicer helps us to achieve the goals that we're out to do, which is that 50% of short journeys in built-up areas in England will become done by wheeling and walking and cycling by 2030. So again, there's a load of these. I'm not going to go through them, but what we do have is the fact that some of these are more important than others. Personal security, for example, is there forward visibility? Can you see escape routes? Are there places where people might linger? Coming back to that example earlier of the street light in the West Yorkshire place, is that actually helping personal security, that lighting, or are you making it actually more enticing for people by creating those pools of darkness? And that's all to do with that. So far, for the ease of tonight's presentation, I have focused entirely on carriageway schemes, which is, I would probably say, about 60%, 70% of what we see travel England. However, we also see a lot of off-highway routes, on traffic-free routes. Now, the path check is very, very similar to this. There's a couple of separate questions that we do look at. One of them is, are we expecting horse riders on a route? Because we know that obviously bridleways are horse-friendly, quite rightly, but also that a lot of traffic-free routes should be designed with horse riders in mind, particularly if they tie up bridleways and enable their network to be as good as ours. So we ask that question, and all that does is really consider certain of the metrics get changed in the way they score. So, for example, off the top of my head, one of the metrics in the path check is, are there regular turning places? Because obviously in the event that the path is closed, or that you see something you don't want to get engaged with up ahead, you want to be able to turn around. The cycle design vehicle's got a turning circle of 3.1 meters. I can't quite remember the exact number off the top of my head, 3.8, 3.9. If you've got a large horse, I am reliably informed that you require 4.4. So therefore, if we expect horse riders on the route, we would then say, does your turning circle, your turning areas meet that requirement rather than the cycle design vehicle one? Now, aware that I am very much battering through this, one of the things that we're going to talk about before I shut up, you'll be glad to hear, is the junction assessment tool. And more importantly, the junction assessment tool check, which sounds a little bit tautological, but it is what it's called. So now, LTN 120 in its appendix has the junction assessment tool. As Travel England, because LTN 120 is cycling design infrastructure guidance, we have taken the JAT and we've broadened it and expanded it so that it includes walking and wheeling. Now, that's basically what is said on this slide. We assess junctions twice. This is slightly awkward because I mentioned earlier that things about left hooks. We mentioned about issues at signalised junctions are considered in the route check. But actually, what we then do is any major junction, which usually involves big roundabouts, signalised junctions, we actually look at individually and see, oh, okay, well, how is it? Can you turn right here? Can you turn left here? If I'm a pedestrian wanting to get from bottom left to top right, how easy is it for me to do that? Now, I've included these slides mainly because I'm assuming, Steve, that these will be circulated after I finish talking, so you can read them properly then. But here is very high level how we score a junction, more or less. It's not quite accurate. It is a heuristic. These are not the specifics. But basically what you can see is that if you're a pedestrian, you get straight across the road in one movement and you're not out of your desire line. Amber, score 1, is you've got a staggered crossing. You might have to wait for a while. It's a bit inconvenient. You're not on desire line, something like that. Red movement is that it's a terrible crossing, but there is a crossing required. And then black movement is that there is no crossing. Similarly for cycling, cycling, you're separated from in either time or space. Amber is that you're potentially in conflict, but if you're a confident cyclist, you might be okay to make that move. Red movements are good lord, good luck, everyone. And black movements is that there is no way of doing that movement in a sensible manner as a cyclist. So you can see, therefore, that that's how that works. And good lord, Steve, I'm ahead of time. This is very exciting. That's more or less all I want to tell you about tonight. Now, we've got the other tools. We can talk about the area check. We can talk about the cross-section tool. We can talk about the crossing selector tool. But generally speaking, if you've got any thoughts about the tools, I'm going to plug 2 things here. One is the smart survey at the top, which is do please go and tell us about how you find using the tools. Tell us how inconvenient they are or how wonderful they are, whichever one it is. And the other one is if you've got any specific questions about how to use the tools, my email address is there as well. It's not terribly complicated. It is my name, followed by the incredibly catchy activetravelengland.gov.uk. Over to you.
Kit, that was excellent, a tour de force. I think we all feel like we could almost parachute into the Active Travel England scoring team and support you now after that thorough briefing. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of questions for you in the Q&A.
Always exciting.
So what I might do, just to shake it up a little bit, is just see whether a couple of people might want to come off mute and ask them live. Ruth, did you want to ask your question? Got the most upvotes, so therefore I feel you deserve to ask a question that Kit may not be able to answer. Go for it.
Thank you. Thanks, Kit. That was a very real canter through. Basically, there was an announcement that a lot of money is going to be spent on highways, roads, bridges, whatever, and nowhere that I see is any parallel cycle routes going to be included in any of this. Not one scheme in Holland is allowed to be built, and hasn't been for at least the last 10 years, without safe space for cycling. And by that, I mean proper segregated if it's the very busy roads that you've talked about. But on the quieter roads, I put the picture in the chat, but I couldn't put it in the Q&A, is we're so strict about the rules of width here. And what they do is they put the cycle lane down either side. I don't know if you've seen them, they're pink. And then drivers have to give way on a single strip down the middle. And I just wondered, do you have a seat at the table about saying, please, can some money of this money be spent on cycle infrastructure? Because there are no roundabouts that I know of. Mark Strong will probably disagree with me. I cycled 2,500 miles this year already, and I haven't been on a single safe roundabout anywhere. Thank you.
Well, I think that there's 2 parts to that question, Ruth, obviously. One of them is in terms of new road schemes, in terms of new strategic road schemes, is a new active travel path going to be included as part of that scheme? And the answer is, obviously, I can't say yes to that. I don't know the answer. What I do know is that Active Travel England is at the table. We are very heavily involved with major road network schemes. We are involved with national highways. We've got memorandum of understanding with them. So, we are very much at that table and pushing for active travel to be included in those schemes where we can. And so I would like to think that more of them will have travel schemes going forward, particularly ones that, tie up otherwise disparate parts of the network. So that's kind of from a national highways point of view. I would say that we're very well plugged in there, and hopefully we'll see that. Then the other one is where you kind of come down to that example of the lane that you've put in the chat with the removed centre line and the 2 advisory cycle lanes. I mean, a lot of those roads will be under obviously local authority control, so it's a local authority decision. Now, what we are doing is producing some rural design guidance, and I say rural advisedly, but essentially it's LTN 120 in a slightly different context, which will include examples just like that. And a range of options that local authorities can choose to enable active travel on those kinds of routes. I think the issue with those Routes is, generally speaking, that where they have been implemented so far in the UK, and this is a personal opinion, the traffic counts haven't been low enough to enable high quality cycling and walking on them. One of the really good examples that I think we should take lessons from is Jersey's Greenways network, which has got a very similar line to that. But what they tend to do is they will have, for example, I'm going to make up some numbers now, 3 meters on one side, which is black tarmac, and then they'll have 1.5 meters, which will be brown, or some kind of coloured tarmac, to indicate that that is a pseudo footway, for want of a better term, or a pseudo active travel lane, actually, more accurately. But what they do to enforce that is that about every 200 meters, they put in a wooden bollard, so that if you're driving along, you can pull into the active travel lane to let another car pass. But what you can't do, of course, is drive in it all the time, because there's these bollards in front of you. So you have to go back into the lane that is dedicated for traffic. And I think what we haven't done yet necessarily is quite crack that in a UK perspective. So hopefully the Royal Design Guidance will enable people to explore more exciting options around that, including other things, textured surfaces, all sorts of stuff that might enable or encourage drivers to leave active travel space for active travel things, be that walking, be that cycling, be that, I don't know, horse riding, whatever it might be.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kit. Very, very good answer. Because we've got more questions thudding into the Q&A box, I'm going to speed this up by reading some of them out for you, if that's all right, Kit. And you can probably see them as well. So top of the list, most upvotes is from Jamie, recalling an accessibility audit tool survey with Sustrans Scotland 2 years ago. One of the big things highlighted there was camber, an innocent detail for two-wheelers, but potentially crippling for multi-wheelers. He'd like to see critical camber in your list too. What are your thoughts on that?
We do actually consider camber. It's one of the things that we look at. We do make sure that camber is appropriate at locations, and indeed a very steep camber that will tip you into traffic if you're on a multi-wheeled bike or in a wheelchair is a critical issue. So we absolutely do look for that, and it's in the tool. If you go to gov.uk, sorry, I didn't put the link on the actual slides, but if you search ATE's design review tools and download the Excel spreadsheet, it'll tell you the numbers we look at.
Brilliant. Nice one, Kit. That all right for you, Jamie? All good?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent stuff. Mark Strong, thank you for the very hilarious I built a path to camber comment in the chat. I think you built a path to everywhere. Let's face it, Mark. Next up, Kit, we've got one from Shane in Galway regarding the cross-section tool. An issue he thought was dealt with poorly and completely in LTM 120 was the issue of carriageway and lane widths for mixed traffic. Various sources such as Crow, Parkin, we're getting some sources cited, argue for wider traffic lanes in certain situations by way of reducing conflict between cycle traffic and motor traffic. Is this discussed in this cross-section tool?
Yes. So one of the things that we look for, and indeed one of our critical issues in the route check, and that's brought up in the cross-section tool, is that if you are cycling in mixed traffic, what we really, really want to avoid is you being in a lane that is 3.25 to 3.9 meters wide. Less than 3.25, cyclists are generally more likely to take the primary position, drivers are less likely to feel they've got the space to overtake within the lane, so they will wait until the other lane is clear. And obviously over 3.9, it's much easier for them to provide that required 1.5 meter of passing space. So we do consider that.
Brilliant. So next, we've got quite a few questions from H. I'm just going to take the one that's got an upvote.
All right, Dave.
So Dave's always here with us, where he dives into the issue of corduroy tactile paving, other horrors, most basic failings in schemes that you've seen. He's threatening a Flickr album. Dave, I think a Pinterest board would be very on trend now rather than a Flickr album. So of those sorts of many horrors, as he calls them. What are your thoughts, Kit, particularly on corduroy tactile paving being used instead of the correct stuff?
I mean, I think, tactile paving is incorrectly used at times by local authorities. One of the things that we are here to do is to try and make sure that doesn't happen. there's a certain level at which we were only set up 2 years ago. We only got up to speed about 18 months ago. We're now affecting designs and stuff that's going in the ground. So absolutely, there are errors in new schemes that have gone in, but hopefully we can catch them on inspection. And if we can't, we can catch them in design for future. So I completely agree that, tactile guidance is something that, as an industry, I would say we're not great on, because certainly if I go back a couple of years to my private sector days, I would literally just put a box and say tactiles here, and it was not my job to decide which ones it was. I would leave that up to the design engineer as a policy person. So I think we need to get much more on top of that. We do engage with inclusive mobility a lot more. We're working a lot with partners such as Wheels for Wellbeing, Transport for All. We do really engage with a lot of user groups in that space, the RNIB, and so on. So we are trying to make that a lot better. And indeed, one of the metrics in our route check tool that I mentioned earlier, although I didn't talk about it in length, is that tactiles are legible. And we've chosen the wording very, very carefully, because actually, if you follow the guidance in inclusive design, inclusive mobility, the tactile design guidance, in tactile design guidance, not inclusive mobility, you might find that you end up with quite an illegible layout because you've got multiple tails running to the same spot and stuff. One of the questions we ask is not just, is it in line with guidance, but is it in the spirit of the guidance and legible? So we are there on that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kip. So Beth's question's got 3 upvotes, very popular, Beth. But I suspect as a civil servant, you may not be able to answer it, but you could have a go. So locally, Beth is having issues with schemes that are not being funded by other means, town deal funding, etc., which are being funded by other means, not taking your sensible advice on board. Are there any plans for Active Travel England to gain any greater authority and generally world domination?
Well, obviously, we're moving on to world domination, Steve. That's our first step. But before we get there, what we need to do is establish, clear lines of our influence over things. And I think one of the things that we are doing and we're looking at is that in a more devolved funding world, Active Travel England's role in dishing out funding is going to decline. Instead, our role is going to be about assuring funding that's already been delivered. Now, that is actually, I would say, a good thing, because what that means is that rather than assessing, I'm going to make up numbers again, £500 million of funding, we're going to be assessing £500 billion of funding. So well done us. We're going to be looking at much more stuff. And what there is about that is that there is the capability funding review system that we have, where ATE applies capability levels to local authorities based on the quality of the stuff that they deliver. And what we can do is, if there is an authority that is consistently not applying best practice, and we can inspect those schemes and say, well, we said that you should do something differently here. Why have you not done that? What's going on? And they don't have a good reason. Then there's opportunity for us to then say, well, actually, you shouldn't be capability level 2. You should be a lower level. And what's really interesting is that I know that partners across government, DFT particularly, but MCHLG and others are intrigued by the capability level system and are very keen to apply it across a wider spectrum. So I would say that there's not a direct input. We can't turn around and say, no, you get money taken off you. What we can do, however, is we can tell our colleagues in government, our colleagues across the civil service, that local authority X is not listening to the government, is not applying best practice, and that maybe that should be borne in mind when they are given future funding settlements.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kip. Next up, Mark Strong's question, I think, isn't a universal question around horses. In principle, should horses be allowed in the world? I think it's probably pertaining to active travel, unless I've got that wrong, Mark. But Mark Strong has a particular phobia of horses that you.
No, I'm not trying to shoot. They shoot horses, don't they? I'm not trying to suggest that. That was a film title, wasn't it?
Yes.
No, I'm not. It's on shared use. You mentioned interurban shared use paths. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with shared use paths is it's something that we need to understand much more about. I mean, if I go to the BHS, they will present me with evidence that says that horse riders don't mind sharing with other users. What we don't have necessarily is evidence from the other way that people with children and buggies don't mind the fact that there's a giant horse right next to them on the path, and what that actually means in terms of, actually it should be 3, if it's 3 meters without a horse, it should be 4.5 meters with a horse, or whatever that is. We are working through all of that as part of our rural guidance, and I think there's a real question also about the number of horses, because there's something around, if there aren't, I'm sure that the British Horse Society will say differently, but horses are not a frequent occurrence in a lot of places. They're quite you'll see them on Saturday, you'll see them on a Tuesday afternoon, but you won't see them every day at peak hours. They're not going to be riding to a coffee shop. So there's something around going, do you know what? If an active travel route ties up 2 bridle ways or enables an active travel journey on a horse to happen, I mean, if we think that the cycling network is disjointed, the bridleway network is even worse for horses. Of going, well, do you know what? If there's a simple fix of it's 500 meters, we've got the space. There's no reason why we wouldn't allow 3 horses a week to use this. Then why should we by default rule them out? I think is the question. Because the question is, if we use the shared use roundel that is just the horse, just the bike and the person, then legally the horse cannot ride on that path. If we use the one that is the 3 of them, then they can. Now, if it's a busy space next to a livery stables and, between that and the paddock, and there's 17 horses an hour going up and down there, and it's also, somewhere we want to be a key route, then obviously we want to separate those users. But there is something around going, what crucially we shouldn't do is accidentally design out horse riders through just unthinking application of our tools. But equally, I'm not saying that we should be allowing horses on every shared use path in the country. I think there's also a little bit something around context, and a really good example was given to me in Cambridgeshire, I presume, where there's a really nasty A road, and it needs to cross a river. And there's a bridleway on one side of the river, there's a bridleway on the other side of the river, there's a really horrible A road that crosses the river, and there's a shared use path that crosses the river. Now, the shared use path is marked as only for pedestrians and cyclists. And actually, you do look at it and you go, it's 4 meters wide. It's quite nice. Like for 5 horses a day to use that path actually would enable them to not be on the really dangerous A road and get mown down by Land Rovers at 60 miles an hour. That, as an argument for us saying, well, you might, it does make sense that maybe we should look at enabling horse riders to use that route. So when I'm saying that we want to design for active travel users, it really is obviously walking and cycling first. We are Active Travel England. Those are our things, are walking, wheeling, and cycling. But there's no reason why we should actively design out horse riders if it makes sense for them to be there, given how few of them there are.
Sorry, I wasn't clear then. My point was that some horse riders would allege that using sealed surfaces actively designs out horse riders. And by the way, your bridge example is probably about parapet height.
Well, I mean, it's not actually about parapet height because it's over a river, so the parapet height doesn't matter. It's only over roads that parapet height is the problem for horse riders. I understand it, Mark. You can tell me I'm wrong.
No, if it depends on the drop, if you fall into a horse.
I mean, this is literally
at this point, chaps, I may intervene. As soon as we got to parapet height, I think we crossed the line.
So what I will say, sorry, Steve, is just to finish that up, is just to say that absolutely a lot of the British Horse Society and other horse riding groups will say that they need to have a unsealed surface. I think if they're using our network, they can use a sealed surface. The problem becomes when we are taking their network and sealing it. Then maybe we need to look at making sure there's an unsealed alternative next to it.
Very good. Thank you, Kip. And if they're wearing a red coat and blowing a horn, open a trapdoor and send them to hell.
Yes.
Excellent. Good. So we've got a few more. I'm going to run through a few more, Kit, and then I think I will stop us. So if you are typing a question now, you may be disappointed, given that there are 17 in the queue and everybody's really more. So I'm not going to go through all 17, Kit, because that would be completely...
Can you frame them as yes, no, and I can just fire through them in quick round?
Aren't barriers a critical issue?
Yes. Well, no, they are not. And the reason they are
Yes,
not.
no. We're doing yes, no, Kit.
So they are a serious policy conflict because they prevent legitimate users from using the path. However, what they are not is a road layout associated with increased fatalities. So they are a policy conflict. They're one we take very, very seriously, but they are not a critical issue because that's the difference.
Okay. From Jody, are there any video tutorials online on how to use the tools?
Yes, I think if you search YouTube, they should be available. If you go to our ATE website and look for webinars or engagement webinars, I can't quite remember the phrasing, you can find lots of information in far more detail about how to use our tools. And
you can, of course, share the recording of this edition of Active Travel Cafe.
I would not recommend trying to use a tool based on my update tonight.
Okay, maybe not. Cameron Murray, Cameron, thanks for this. Are the Safer Road funded schemes, DFT funded, assessed by Active Travel England, or just those funded by the Active Travel funding?
That is an excellent question. I don't know the answer about Safer Road Fund schemes. I do know that we look at a wide gamut of DFT and DHCLG funding. So we look at Levelling Up Fund, we look at MRN schemes, we look at Towns Fund schemes. I can't remember if Safer Road Schemes is one of them. I can look out and find out for you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Well, I think you're doing very well. Have you got some water there that you can slurp on so that you keep going? Excellent. Good. Chris Knight in Kirklees, should the street check path check be completed on all schemes that include Active Travel, including those that aren't Active Travel England funded?
I mean, in Kirklees, Chris, and I'm going to betray my old employer here, but say that West Yorkshire, I think, applies it to all schemes anyway. So it will have been done, I hope, on your scheme. If it hasn't been, it is a useful tool to apply. It will give a holistic view about how to apply it, but I can't obviously say that West Yorkshire should do, but I think they do already.
Fabulous. Thanks, Kit. So I think we might take Rachel Wigington's question last, okay, if that's all right, because I am conscious of not getting you to answer too many more. Her question, you can probably see it. Can you see it in the Q&A box? It's quite a lengthy one. But just asking whether you've got a conversation going on about Active Travel England about getting the basics in place for short journeys, the trip from the house to local shops, those everyday sort of utility trips, the local transport hire. She says she still hears too much about cycle commutes to work. Most people won't be able to do that in England and in the Netherlands. It's above journeys that are the key. Generally, what are your thoughts on these different types of journeys? And you must have.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's really, really interesting, and I'm glad we ended on this because I can now talk for 13 minutes about this, Steve. So thank you.
That wasn't actually the intention, Kit, but.
So okay, I'll be as quick as I can then. One of the things that's really, really interesting is that when I joined the transport planning industry, all we talked about were commutes. All we talked about were white men getting in their car, driving into a city centre, going to an office job 9 till 5, and then driving home. And that's all that mattered. That's all we fixed every junction around. All we did everything else. One of the really interesting switches or changes over the last 15, 20 years, longer than that, but I would say in the last 10 years in particular, has been the move from commuting journeys to utility journeys. We've actually moved on, and Active Travel England is, I think, a really core part of that government switch in focus to utility journeys. Because actually what we want to do, and what Chris and the other, Boardman and others are really, really interested in, is it's about getting kids to school. It's about going to the shop. It's about meeting your friend, going to the tennis club. It's those journeys you need to do. It's about all the things. We heard for years about how transport is a derived demand. It's about all those journeys that are enabled by that. We've actually kind of moved as an industry towards that. Now, Active Travel is leading the way in that transition, and I think other bits of it are still following, but we are moving on from that commuting basics to enabling those utility journeys. And that's really exciting from from an equality point of view, because we know that women and carers and others do more trip training, but they're all utility journeys. They're going to the supermarket, they're going to the school, they're going to the thing, they're going to the whatever. We are really keen on that. So short journeys are really, really important. And I think that one of the things that's really, really interesting is that if we were to look at the LCWIP guidance again now, that's been 8 years, 8 years, I'm going to say, since LCWIP came out. we would look much more at those kinds of journeys than just commuting journeys. And we would suggest that if you were looking at how you would enable a journey, actually what we really want to enable is those utility journeys more broadly than those commuting journeys. And that's one of the reasons why Active Travel England, when we funded schemes in the past, when we have direct funded schemes, is we've looked at trips to school, we've looked at trips to the shop, we've looked at enabling residential areas to connect to trip generators, and that's really, really important. But that's not to say, and this I think is where it gets really complicated, is that boundary between a leisure trip and a recreational trip and a utility trip is really kind of fuzzy, because if I go to the shop in the village over from this one that I'm living in, that's a utility journey. But if I go via the pretty route, is that a recreational journey or is it a utility journey? Because I'm still going to the shop either way. So what we're really keen to do is try and really explore that. I think one of the things that's really, really exciting about the new government that we have is that Active Travel England in the DFT is really at the heart of the health mission. And what that means is that regardless of which route I take to the shop, if I'm walking or cycling that route, then I'm healthier than if I'd driven it. So what that means is that Active Travel England's got a wider remit than we might have had previously to look at a whole range of journeys beyond commuting, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So whilst you were speaking there and painting the beautiful picture of those lovely journeys, I got some intense lobbying via WhatsApp to keep going a little bit longer with you. Are you okay with that?
I'm here for the duration, Steve.
Can you do it? I don't want to tie you out, but Sally, who's one of our organisers, couldn't get into the Q&A, and I hadn't spotted that she'd actually sent me a question for you via WhatsApp, which is, tell me if I get this wrong, Sally. She'd like to know whether you know if Active Travel England plans to do any research into levels of traffic on side roads, residential streets in general, to understand what level of traffic is felt to be comfortable for cycling for children or people cycling with children. The current tools are only useful if they're based on evidence of what people feel comfortable with, and she's not aware of any existing research into this.
It's a really good question, and one of the things that in my professional capacity, one of the things that I've been doing at Travel England is I've been leading on the Rural Design Guide, hence why I was talking about Village A and Village B earlier. And obviously part of that is about quiet lanes. In quiet lanes, if we take LTN 120 for a minute, we currently have a number of 2,500 vehicles as being vaguely comfortable to cycle in, which is actually quite a lot if you think about 250 vehicles in a peak hour. That's probably not something you want little Timmy cycling in or walking in, but it's just on that cusp of it. But that's a function of speed versus flow. On a quiet lane, you're talking maybe 1,000 vehicles, because obviously they might be traveling faster than 30 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour. And that means that's not. So one of the things that we want to do, and one of the things that I'm really excited to be part of at Travel England is that one thing I didn't do at the start of this was actually introduce where I sit. So I'm a senior inspector. I sit in the inspectorate, but where I sit actually, other than to the left of the window on a Tuesday when I'm in the office, is in the Design Centre of Excellence. And one of our jobs is looking at infrastructure and understanding where the gaps are in the understanding about what works and what doesn't. So we know, for example, that if a route scores more than 50% on our toolkit, it will have a higher uplift than routes that score less than 50%. Now, we also know that if you score 70%, 80%, you probably get higher, but we don't have enough detailed evidence yet to get that spectrum of information out yet. We do know that 50% is a really good cutoff. That's a gap that we want to expect and understand and know more about. And exactly what Sally's just talked about is exactly the same kind of thing. When we're talking about rural design, we're saying, 1,000 vehicles a day. We're talking about urban areas, we're talking about 2,500 vehicles a day. But what does that mean in terms of user comfort? And likewise, to broaden out further, I mentioned about lighting earlier. Well, what routes are more attractive to, say, women than men, or young children to old men, for all that matter? You know, how does the user demographic change given the conditions of the route? These are all things that we want to understand a lot more about. We want to commission research on. What we are trying to do is structure that research program in a meaningful way. So genuinely a genuine ask to Active Travel Cafe members is, if you've got a research question that you think we should be asking, do let me know. I can put it into the mix. We can see what's going on with it. But in terms of Sally's exact question, I don't think currently have a project on that, but we're looking at that 1,000 number, we're looking at 2,500 number, so that there is associated research, but not an exact research question that is targeted at that question.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kit. So that's a very generous offer from Kit there. So send in those research asks. Right, we'll do a couple more and then we'll head off and enjoy the sunlit evening, Kit. Colin McKenzie in Ealing is asking about widths. Why is 3.9/4 still the quoted width? Try getting overtaken by a bus in 4.0 with the driver keeping his offside mirror within the lane. So what are your thoughts on width? Is that still the right?
So absolutely agreed that at 4 meters they shouldn't be overtaking within the line. We all know that the highway code says you should cross the line to do it. But at 4 meters, most drivers, nearly all drivers, will cross the lane to do it. So that's why we think it's the appropriate width, based on the evidence we have at the moment. If there is lots of evidence, again, I mean, to come back to what we just said, Steve, if there's lots of evidence that that's not the case, then we'll change the numbers. That's the joy of ATE, is that we are here as an active body that is keen to understand these issues and make guidance based on them. So at the moment, we think that's the case. If that's not the case, then let's change it.
Very good, very good. Okay, so finally, let's finish with Ben's got a question about recently submitted comments on large housing estate planning applications, which were found to be very detailed and helpful. So there you go. That's a pat on the back there, Kit, which is all very good.
I'll pass it on to my planning colleagues.
Part of an area review. And more generally, what are your thoughts on planning, massive push on new houses, new towns, whether we're getting them right? Let's go big picture for your final answer.
I mean, you moved away from my level of expertise here, Steve. What I will say is that ATE is really well plugged into the planning system now. And we saw that in the was it 2 weeks ago or last week? I can't quite remember when there was the move to remove quangos from statutory planning. ATE was not amongst them. We were one of the ones that stayed. That's because the government does, it appears, really value our input into these things and understand that actually, coming back to Sally's point about short journeys, actually designing streets that enable people to walk and cycle those short journeys is at the core of any new development. We've had too many years of car-based development. So what's really exciting, I think, is that we are in a really good place to inflect things going forward. However, at the end of the day, planning is a long process. There's a whole load of stuff in the pipeline that's been approved that's going to be built that we haven't said stuff to. So, without wanting to speak for our planning colleagues, I'm assuming it's going to be 5 years at least until we start to see an input, like an impact of ATE's input into the planning system.
Kit, that one excellent note to finish on. Kit, thank you so much. Should we all give Kit a bit of a sort of weirdly silent Zoom round of applause like this? Excellent stuff. Jazz hands as well. Much better. Right. Thank you so much, Kit. That's been an absolute tour de force. We're just all really very impressed that you stayed the course there. We still left 11 questions unanswered, I'm afraid, but
genuinely, Steve, if you want to send them to me by email, I'll try and answer them all.
Excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Kit. We'll do that. So we'll send those to Kit. We've got everybody's names that attach to those questions. That's really excellent. We are on an Easter break next. A short break for all those chocolates and all that sort of fun stuff. Back after the Easter break, I think I'm looking at my colleagues, Wilf and Sally and Adam, Tuesday, 29th of April, I think we're back, post-Easter with, brace yourselves, people, motor normativity with our speaker, Ian Walker. So there you go.
Oh, lovely.
Who doesn't
there
want to be Kit? Make sure you're back from that for that one. We're doing motor normativity, or as I prefer to say, autohegemony, to channel a little bit of Gramsci. So make sure you come back after Easter. Thanks again to Kit. Thanks to everybody for being here. So many brilliant questions. You've all been awesome. Have a lovely evening and a lovely Easter. Take care, everybody. Bye.
And Passover